You are sitting in a meeting and someone interrupts you. Before you have consciously processed what just happened, something shifts in your body. Your jaw tightens, your chest narrows, a heat moves up through your neck, and somewhere in the back of your mind, a voice begins composing a response you will probably never say out loud. You call this anger. But what if anger is not what you think it is? What if the feeling you just had, that tight, hot, urgent sensation, is not a uniquely human emotional experience? What if it is something far older, far more mechanical, and far more revealing about the kind of animal you actually are? What if your emotions are not feelings at all in the way we usually mean that word, but programs? Old software written in the body long before the brain existed to interpret it, running in the background of every moment of your life whether you want them to or not. This is not a metaphor. This is what the science increasingly suggests. Let's start at the beginning. Not your beginning, the beginning of the system. About 500 million years ago, the first vertebrates were navigating a world that was almost entirely hostile. There were no tools, no language, no ability to plan more than a few seconds into the future. What these early creatures had was a body, and that body needed two things above everything else: to find resources and to avoid becoming one. The nervous system that evolved to serve these two goals was not sophisticated. It was fast, it was automatic, and it was brutally effective. When these early animals encountered a threat, their bodies did something that required no thinking at all. The heart rate accelerated. Blood moved away from digestion and toward the muscles. The pupils dilated. The breath quickened. The entire organism mobilized in a fraction of a second to do one of three things: fight, flee, or freeze. This response did not begin in the brain. It began in the body. The brain came later, and when it did, it built itself on top of this older system rather than replacing it. The emotional brain, what neuroscientists call the limbic system, is not separate from the survival system. It is the survival system dressed in slightly newer clothes. What you experience as an emotion is, at its core, a body state, a physiological configuration your nervous system enters in response to what it perceives in the environment. The tightness in your chest is not a metaphor for anger. It is anger. Or rather, it is the physical substrate that your brain will later label as anger. The feeling comes first. The word comes after. This is one of the most important and disorienting things modern neuroscience has established about how emotions actually work. We tend to think that we feel something and then our body responds. But the evidence suggests it often goes the other way. Your body responds first. The brain interprets the body state after the fact and constructs the emotion from that interpretation. The psychologist and neuroscientist Lisa Feldman Barrett has spent decades studying this. Her research suggests that emotions are not fixed universal programs that erupt automatically from the brain. Instead, the brain is constantly making predictions, using past experience to anticipate what is happening in the body and in the world, and constructing an emotional experience to make sense of those signals. Two people can have the same physiological state, elevated heart rate, tight chest, quickened breath, and one will experience it as excitement and the other as dread, depending on the context the brain predicts they are in. But here is the crucial thing. The raw material those predictions are working with, the body states themselves, the elevated heart rate, the narrowed chest, the surge of cortisol, those are ancient. Those are the survival software, and they predate you by hundreds of millions of years. Fear, in its physiological form, is not a human invention. It is a solution to a problem that vertebrates have been solving since before the first fish developed a spine. The tightening you feel when you hear a sudden noise, the alertness that floods your body when someone looks at you with hostility, the paralysis that descends when a situation feels completely overwhelming, these are not personality quirks. They are field-tested survival responses, refined across geological time, preserved in your nervous system because they worked. The problem is that they were optimized for an environment that no longer exists. Your stress response was designed for acute physical threats: a predator, a rival, a cliff edge. It was designed to mobilize your body for a short burst of life or death action and then return to baseline. In that environment, A system that fires fast and hard and asks questions later was a survival advantage. The animal that paused to reflect before running from the snake did not pass on its genes. But you do not live in that environment. You live in a world of emails and performance reviews and difficult conversations and social hierarchies and financial anxiety. Your brain cannot always distinguish between the lion and the passive-aggressive comment in a group chat. And so your ancient survival software fires anyway. Your cortisol spikes, your heart rate elevates, your body mobilizes for a threat that has no physical form and requires no physical response. And because the threat never resolves the way a predator threat would, the body stays activated. The software keeps running. And over time, this chronic activation of an acute stress system becomes one of the most significant sources of suffering in modern human life. This is why chronic stress is physically damaging in ways that go far beyond feeling bad. The immune system is suppressed. Inflammation increases. The cardiovascular system operates under sustained pressure it was not designed to maintain for years at a time. The software is running, but there is no emergency to resolve, and so it just keeps burning. Now consider anxiety. Anxiety is often described as fear without an object, a sense of dread or threat with no clear source. In survival terms, anxiety makes sense as a system that scans the environment for potential threats even when none are immediately present. In the ancient world, this would have been enormously useful. The animal that was slightly more attuned to possible danger, that never fully relaxed even in calm moments, was the animal that survived the threat it did not see coming. But in a modern environment, where the threats are abstract and unresolvable, where the sources of anxiety are existential rather than physical, this same scanning system becomes a kind of torture. The software keeps looking for the predator. The predator never comes. And so the system invents one, from the raw material of tomorrow's deadline, next year's uncertainty, the imagined judgment of people who are not even in the room. Your anxiety is not a flaw. It is a feature that was enormously valuable in a different environment, running in an environment it was never designed for. The same can be said for social pain. When you are excluded from a group, when someone you trust betrays you, when you feel humiliated in front of others, the pain you experience is not just emotional. Studies have shown that social pain activates many of the same neural regions as physical pain. This is not an accident. In the ancestral environment, exclusion from the group was not a metaphorical wound. It was a death sentence. You could not hunt alone. You could not defend yourself alone. You could not survive alone. Social rejection was a genuine physical threat, and the brain treated it accordingly, with the same alarm signals it used for a broken limb. That is why being left out of a party invitation can feel, for a moment, like something is actually wrong with you physically, because the system processing that information evolved to treat social exclusion as a potentially fatal event. The software is running an appropriate response. It is just running it in a context where the stakes are categorically different. Here is the piece that changes how you might look at yourself. Every emotion you have ever experienced, the jealousy, the grief, the loneliness, the shame, the sudden irrational dread at 2 a.m, was generated by a system that has been solving survival problems since long before humans existed. These are not signs of weakness. They are not signs of dysfunction. They are the output of one of the most sophisticated and battle-tested biological systems ever produced by evolution, running in a world it was not designed for. This does not mean you are helpless. Understanding the nature of the software is the first step toward developing what psychologists call emotion regulation, the ability to observe an emotional state without being completely controlled by it. When you can recognize that the tight chest in a difficult conversation is your ancient survival system firing, not a genuine emergency, you create a small but crucial gap between the signal and the response. In that gap is the possibility of choice. The Stoics called this the space between stimulus and response. Viktor Frankl described it as the last human freedom. Modern neuroscientists describe it as the difference between emotional reactivity and emotional regulation. But all of them are pointing at the same thing. The moment when you can see the software running and decide whether to let it drive. You will feel fear, you will feel anger, you will feel the sharp sting of social rejection and the paralyzing weight of anxiety. You were built to feel these things. They are millions of years old, and they are not going anywhere. But the brain that interprets those signals is also yours. The story you tell about what they mean, whether this tight chest is a catastrophe or a signal worth noticing, whether this anger is a command or a messenger, whether this fear is the truth about the world or just the software protecting you the only way it knows how, that story is something you can write. You are running ancient software on very modern hardware. The conflicts that arise from that mismatch are not a bug. They are the fundamental condition of being human, and understanding them, really understanding them, may be one of the most useful things you ever do.